the polls show that the UK doesn't quite love him back so much at the moment. And I think that's probably a very hard pill for him to swallow. We're kicking off today with a great story and details of a dinner party, Kate, that I think we probably wish you and I had been invited to.
Yes, we weren't sadly among the 18 guests, reportedly.
Invite lost in the post.
Yes. It was Meghan and Harry hosting at their Montecito villa. And who did they have but Brooklyn Beckham and Nicola Peltz?
They're going through a bit of a tough time, aren't they?
They are. So on the front pages of the newspapers here, particularly the tabloids, there's been a lot of discussion about within the Brooklyn family. There have been a feud that within the Beckham family, there's been a family feud that Brooklyn Beckham is no longer speaking to his mum and dad, David and Victoria Beckham.
Missed David Beckham's 50th birthday party last week. That was a biggie.
Unfollowed them or haven't been speaking to them on Instagram. So it's been this whole kind of back and forth, hasn't it? It seems to be some sort of falling out with his wife, Nicola Peltz, who's the daughter of a billionaire financier in the States. And then...
It all feels quite familiar, doesn't it?
It all feels quite familiar.
A family torn apart.
A father and son not speaking.
A wife getting some of the blame, fairly or unfairly. That's the question, isn't it? And then it emerges that Harry and Meghan have them over for dinner in Montecito.
That's right.
And a slight sort of shoulder to cry on. And there's some interesting quotes in the Sun about this. It's a great scoop from the Sun, saying how empathetic Harry and Meghan are to the situation, and how Meghan particularly felt very empathetic towards Nicola as, the person who seems to be getting the blame in the kind of court of public opinion.
Well, yeah, apparently there was a tete-a-tete between the two women during the dinner, that they went off to one side and had a very close conversation, we're told in the pages of the Sun. But it's all very interesting. David and Victoria Beckham, obviously king and queen of kind of popular culture here, him being former England captain of the football team, her being, the former Spice Girl, now very successful fashion designer, which we'll come on to in a minute, because there's another connection there.
But there are fault lines drawn here, aren't there? Because Prince William is pretty buddy with David Beckham, given all their sort of, he's president of the FA, patron of the FA. He did all the historic World Cup bid with David Beckham, got to know him very well then. David Beckham is increasingly aligning himself with the King.
Well, he's ambassador of the King's Foundation.
He's popping up everywhere at the moment with the King,
Him and Victoria went to the state banquet. Do you remember when the Qataris came over last year?
And the Highgrove Italian dinner recently. They had, we saw them having, cosy chats with the King and Queen at that.
And not just that, but behind the scenes as well. So David has been up to Highgrove in a private capacity and he started keeping bees like the King. Seems to have shown an interest.
So you've got Team UK Royals, King, Queen, William, Kate will come on to, David and Victoria. USA Royals, you've got Harry, Meghan, the alternative court in Montecito.
Indeed.
And Brooklyn and Nicola Peltz. It is fascinating.
Although David and Victoria did used to be close to Harry. So Harry was a pal of David's, and they came to their wedding in 2018. And Meghan and Harry's wedding, they were guests. They know them. But then there was a suggestion that Meghan had fallen out with Victoria Beckham and had assumed that she was selling stories or leaking stories about her or something like that, which of course the Beckhams denied. So there's a bit of a backstory there between them falling out with the Beckham seniors. But it is very fascinating that this dinner happened, we're told, last week.
Yeah.
Now, what happened this week, of course, was we saw the Princess of Wales on a rare solo engagement, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
She was at a British Fashion Council event where she was giving a prize to a new designer.
What was she wearing, Kate?
What was she wearing?
Not that Kensington Palace told us.
A lovely £1,300 olive green trouser suit designed by none other than Victoria Beckham.
Wow. Which lots of people have interpreted as a show of support for Victoria and David Beckham in this family battle.
Well, it's certainly a show of support for Victoria's fashion brand.
Yeah.
I mean, the Princess of Wales knows, of course she does, what impact anything she wears has, whether they announce it, whether they don't. It's, instantly recognisable. within a second of her
Sells
appearing
out.
in the suit, all the fashion reporters had pulled up that, it's from the latest collection. She was there to promote British fashion, which she does brilliantly well, as a huge,
Yes.
burgeoning industry.
But she chose that outfit at a time when, as you say, a lot of the papers, particularly the tabloids, were filled with this Beckham family feud. And the Princess of Wales is very clever. She knows that some people are going to seize on that and run with that as like a quite fun show of support detail.
Now, the question is, did the Princess of Wales know about the dinner in Montecito?
I don't
Did she know
Wow.
that had gone on?
Fascinating. Either way.
It is fascinating either way.
The olive green as well, olive branch. Oh, peace building. We know all about that over here, Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace. Anyway, it's endlessly fascinating. We wait to see, where else Nicola and Brooklyn might pop up, whether or not, I don't think they're going to be on the invite list for any garden parties now, are they?
Not here, no, but there might be garden parties in Montecito that they'll be invited to.
Exactly. Anyway, away from the headlines of family feuds in California, Princess of Wales has also been making quiet waves this week with a rather lovely story about healing, hope, and the power of nature. We saw her release this week on Monday this video, very interesting personal video, which we're told was the first of a quarterly series all around the seasons called Mother Nature. And she did the voiceover for it. Very, quite spiritual message, talking about, the healing power of nature and
How nature's her sanctuary.
She said nature's been, over the past year, nature's been my sanctuary. Obviously, referring to her recovery from cancer. We know she's now in remission. There was also like a very strong vibe about moving away from the digital world. She talked about, in this ever increasing digital world, the importance of sort of being outside in nature.
In a video released on social media.
Image,
but that's how people are
accessing
that, I suppose. But I suppose that's probably where you need to see it if you're scrolling through. I thought, I was speaking to someone at the Palace about it when they put it out, and I said, it feels like, a kind of a timeline cleanse, really. You're scrolling through all this stuff, there's a lot of bad news out, and then there was this video, and it really had hallmarks of the kind of David Attenborough, those sweeping scenes of the coast,
With
the
them
mountains.
as well, them in Scotland.
Yeah, and then we see Kate and William pop up, and it was their recent visit to Scotland as Lord and Lady of the Isles. And I think it felt, it was Will War again behind it, but this was very much
the videographer that they love
spearheaded.
using. Yes.
Yeah, we were told it's spearheaded by the Princess of Wales, that she was involved in the whole creative aspect of it. And I think it's her kind of creative vision. She's really enjoying playing around with these things, which I think is interesting. And that's all part of her recovery.
Yeah.
And the way that she sees her role and the way that she wants to communicate with the public in an immediate way. She's been quite honest, I think. She did that Scouts video recently, didn't she? And she said that, she
quite
has
similar in vibe, wasn't it?
Yeah, very. She talked about it being a kind of spiritual, really deep connection that she has with nature. So I think it's interesting, and for them to say this is going to be a series, so they're going to do one for every season, at least for a year, and then presumably they'll see how it goes after that.
I thought the line that also stood out for me was when she talked about spring being a time of hope and renewal. And I think for her, she probably feels, she is coming out of what was an incredibly tough year last year for her with her cancer treatment, feeling like she's finally, able to look at her horizon with probably more clarity of vision. And earlier in the week, or on the same day maybe, the Times had an interesting interview with James Middleton,
yes,
who's promoting the
who's talking about how challenging it had been.
Exactly, and he
the
said,
whole family.
Yeah, it had been, he was obviously respected her privacy, but he talked about how challenging for, not only for his sister Kate, but for the whole family, her diagnosis had been, and how much support they'd given.
He's done it very well as well, I think.
Yeah.
He's been very honest about his own mental health battles. And he's in a tricky position, like, Pippa has been, Kate's sister, in how much do you share and how much do you kind of give away, that people are obviously interested in him being the Princess of Wales's brother.
Yeah.
But I think he's done it he's been quite cute in the way that he's done that. So he said that it had been a challenging time for her, obviously, and that for the whole family, and that the key was communication to it all, that they keep talking about it. I can see him being in the future being a real kind of mental health advocate or campaigner, because he's come out of that. But it adds another layer, doesn't it? An insight into this year that they had last year, which, by all accounts was just dreadful.
It definitely feels, you and I have talked about this before, but it definitely feels like with this latest video, there has been a shift in the Princess of Wales, a very significant shift
absolutely.
In terms of what she thinks is important now in her
she
life.
said that herself, hasn't she? So it's a chance to kind of reassess everything.
Yeah.
It's made me reconsider everything. It's made me think about, everything.
You notice it, and that Christmas message she did before the carol service, you could really feel the shift in what she was sort of saying. She was talking about taking time out from the busy world and, the stresses and strains of life, of a sort of 24/7 life, which, we might not see her every day, but she's kind of on all the time and there's scrutiny on her. And I think, this is just, it's like her taking a deep breath and going forwards, this is what I'm going to prioritise.
But also it's a kind of message to us all, isn't it? That we're all kind of glued to our phones.
Put your phones down,
Yeah.
Get outside.
Absolutely.
Says Kate.
Yeah.
You too.
Me too. Yeah, she wasn't the only one this week that had a message for us all in an emotional statement from William, really, I think it was. He talked about Child Bereavement UK, of which he's been a patron for a long time. They're now merging with another charity called Winston's Wish. But on Tuesday night, he hosted a private dinner away from the cameras for the charity at Windsor Castle and met some of the people who work for the charity, some people who are helped by the charity, and announcing that kind of that merger between them. He talked about the way in which grief is the hardest thing that anyone can endure as a family or as a child, and it's how to get through that. And this is something that obviously he has a lot of personal experience in. You know, his mother died when he was just 15. Harry was 12, nearly 13. And this is, his chance to sort of talk about what that means. They had that big moment, didn't they, when it was Diana's 20th anniversary, and he talked about the shock never leaving you.
Yeah.
It's always with him. And that was sort of the big moment at which both brothers, both princes, spoke out about their late mother. I don't know whether he'll want to keep talking about it in that way, because he sort of probably feels like he's said his piece, but it is really interesting, and it's these little things that you forget that he's still living with on a daily basis, as anyone is who's gone through something so traumatic.
I think also for him, what has always been interesting in hearing and seeing is how he tries to keep the memory of his mother alive for his children.
Yes.
He's talked about, obviously in the last few years, we've occasionally had on Mother's Day cards that the children have done where they talk about, Granny Diana. And he's mentioned that, he, from a very young age, as sort of young as they could start to understand, he would talk about, photos in the house of Granny Diana to make sure they knew that, the other granny who was absent was still very much a part of their lives. And I've always sort of thought that him trying to do that and keep the memory alive for his own children is potentially, helps him still now cope with the grief and the loss of not having that granny around for his children.
Yeah, that's interesting, that point about memory, isn't it? I think that's one of the things that Child Bereavement UK charity does, is these little memory jars where you can have a kind of tangible link to the person that you've lost by putting little memories in there or little tokens that remind you of the person. And that's one of the saddest things about Harry, that he's sort of said, that he was worried about losing his memories of his mother, or having them sort of wiped from his mind at one point. And the kind of trauma that he's had over that.
There's a close link as well with the charity. So Kensington Palace made it clear that even though the charity is emerging, he will remain patron of Child Bereavement UK, which is now merging with Winston's Wish. But the lovely link that goes, from his children back is Julia Samuel, who founded Child Bereavement UK and was a great friend of Diana's, who is godmother to Prince George and a grief counsellor, and someone that, I'm sure has helped William and Harry through some very difficult times, and is still able to obviously talk to them about, her memories of their mother. And he's always, I think it's interesting that things like Child Bereavement UK, Centrepoint, those charities that have a link back to his mother are very, very important to him.
Yes. The King and Queen have had a busy week this week. They've been up to Bradford, and...
Where else have they been, Kate? Where have you been following them to this week?
Very jolly evening at Kew Gardens in honour, in tribute of the elephant family. I can't speak today. They had a very jolly evening at Kew Gardens to celebrate the work of the Elephant Family, which is a conservation charity set up by Mark Shand, Camilla's late brother, who died. And it was one of those evenings where it was fun, there was lots of laughter, but there were a lot of kind of serious moments as well, because they showed a video of Camilla's brother talking about his passion for the charity and his optimism for the future, for saving the elephants. And she was there with her sister Annabelle Elliott, and she looked very emotional.
He died very tragically, didn't he? He was in New
That's
York
right.
and fell and hit his head.
He slipped and hit his
very
head
unexpectedly.
He did, and I think it was just such a huge shock, as it would be to anybody, for the Queen and her sister. So I think it was nice for them to be there to see that. But when they showed the video and he was right there in front of them, it was kind of a visible shock on their faces, I think, just to see him, but not an unwelcome one. And then they had an award ceremony. So there's an award in his name and there's an award named after the elephant Tara that he rode around India on. And his relationship with Tara was what sparked his idea for this conservation charity. It was a crazy idea, according to the chief exec, Richard Hawkes. And then the King and Queen gave a couple of awards. And then the King did that thing that it's so brilliant when he does do it, but he doesn't do it that often, which is a kind of off-the-cuff, impromptu speech.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good, really, because it looked like he was just about to turn to go. And then he said, I've just got a few thoughts. And he talked about the importance of collaboration over conflict. Now, he was talking about the conflict between the animal and human worlds, and he talked about our poor planet and the desecration of our planet and the fact that we need to realise that we need to protect it if it's going to be there for us in the future. But of course, now with everything that's going on, and as he's always talking about the global situation, which he's always referring to, anytime he talks about collaboration or conflict, there's that kind of double-edged meaning that people think that about Ukraine and everything that's going on with Russia, and I think that was quite a poignant moment, really. And Princess Beatrice was there as well, which I thought was really interesting, because we also saw her mother, Duchess of York, at the palace for a cancer engagement very recently. So interesting to see the York women out in force.
And it looked fun.
It was great fun. There was a woman on stilts dressed as a kind of peacock. There was
random.
Yeah, Sophie Ellis-Bextor singing her heart out. Sadly, the King and Queen didn't stay for a boogie. They went off to supper or whatever. But yeah, it was fun.
Good. I'm glad you had a lovely time out.
And they've been having fun today as well in Bradford.
Kew to Bradford.
They've been whizzing all over the place.
This year's City of Culture. It's been a very cultural day up in Bradford, hasn't it? And Charles and Camilla have been spending the afternoon there doing all sorts of cultural things that tie into their cultural interests, haven't they? So Camilla has been doing something with the National Literacy Trust, of which she's patron. Mm-hmm. She's been visiting the newly renovated birthplace of the Bronte sisters. Mm-hmm. So probably reminiscing about her favourite bits of Wuthering Heights. The King has had a tour of the David Hockney Gallery. Now, we know that they're kind of mates, because I love the idea of these two as mates.
Well, Hockney, memorably turned up in a pair of yellow Crocs when he was invited to the palace recently.
And then just the other day, the King, it emerged, went to see him privately at his London home. He's recently moved from France back to the UK, and he's got this huge exhibition in Paris at the moment. And the King went to see him privately, and David Hockney said rather indiscreetly he refused to paint Charles's portrait, which I just love that he is revered as our greatest living artist in the UK. Given that we've just had given that we've just had the unveiling of the King and Queen's portraits last week, I love that David Hockney said no. And then it emerged that David Hockney's very good at all his iPad paintings, and we had Fraser Scarfe out in Rome as the first digital artist to go on tour. Anyway, I digress. But Charles has been looking around the David Hockney Gallery out there. But what else has he been seeing, Kate?
Well, we've been reminded of one of the King's other talents, which is that he is a member of the Magic Circle, the elite group that magicians are part of. He was given honorary membership in 1975. I think he had to do a kind of entry-level trick. I mean, I I think it's probably
Did he,
his position. His
Did he just
position
wave a
helped
wand?
him.
And they were like, "You're in."
You're in, sir. And he met up with a fellow called who was called Dynamo. People might know him as Dynamo,
What's
but
he now called?
He's now going by his real name, which is Stephen Frayne.
Dynamo's so much better.
I know.
Sorry.
He's reinventing himself for a new age, I suppose. But he was initially in the King's orbit when he was Prince of Wales, because in 2003, Dynamo, Stephen Frayne, was given a loan by the Prince's Trust
and now
to
look
set
at
up
him.
in business. And now look at him. He's one of the brilliant examples of the Prince's Trust. You know, Idris Elba, we've talked about before, another person who got a loan from the charity, Charles's charity, and then went on to amazing things. So he was there, and then the King sort of remembered him and said, "Yeah, you know," and he said, "Well, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you," to the King.
And he did perform a few tricks, didn't he?
Yeah, and the King said, "Well, you know,
Show
it's
us
your
a trick
own
then."
enthusiasm." And they said, "So show us a trick." And he did the old classic. First of all, he turned some old newspaper cuttings into banknotes and asked Charles if it was legal tender. And he said, "Well, I presume so. I don't know."
My head's on there.
I don't think he sees that many notes in his day-to-day life.
What's this?
I don't say, well, most of us don't anyway. Now it's all on card, isn't it? Then he did one of those kind of pick a card and I'll guess it. But it was quite a fancy version of that, because at the end, after producing all the other volunteers' cards and getting it right, Charles had to say that his was the King of Hearts. Very apt. And then instead of producing it from his top pocket or something, Frayne then said, "Everybody look at their mobile phones," which didn't really work for the King. He doesn't have one in his pocket.
Phone. He doesn't have a mobile phone, full stop.
He's got an iPad, but he doesn't have a mobile phone.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, everyone pulls out their mobile phone. And what happened is the Wi-Fi codes, when you search for a Wi-Fi network near you, all of them on everybody's phone had come up King of Hearts. They'd all been renamed, which was quite a fantastic trick to do.
He did try and explain this to Charles, who I don't think kind of understood what Wi-Fi was.
Charles seemed a little perplexed by the whole thing.
Nonplussed. Oh, very good. What's Wi-Fi?
But everybody else was very impressed, and it's a good story. You know, he invited Charles to go on to his new TV show. He said we could tell them about our story. We go way back, and Charles loved it. I mean, it is one of his great successes as Prince of Wales. That charity.
To go around the country and see these people all over the place who were able to say, "We started with nothing. You know, the then Prince's Trust, now King's Trust, helped us, and now look at us." Yeah,
and it's a real tangible benefit having that money in your pocket as a youngster starting out, and what they've done to, you know, what they've turned it into.
His legacy as the Prince of Wales is long-lasting and strong, and I think he's very keen for people not to forget his legacy as the Prince of Wales, isn't he?
Well, the longest-serving Prince of Wales we've ever had. Yeah, and
he didn't waste his time, did he?
He didn't waste his time. If anything, he was sort of driven by this compulsion to make it matter.
Knowing he'd probably be in the waiting seat, in the sort of, you know, co-pilot seat for quite a long time.
I mean, it's those years as Prince of Wales that have cemented his legacy.
Now, turning to our final story of the day, Kate, it's one we've been following for a while at the Times. A YouGov poll, which has been tracking public feelings about the royal family since 2017, appears to have shifted quite a lot in the past few months. So, what does this poll show? It just came out just the other day, didn't it?
Well, this is YouGov, which is the kind of official company. You know, whenever they do a poll, it's proper. There's a big sample size. But it was taken, interestingly, a few days after Harry's bombshell interview with the BBC, in which he talked about wanting to be reconciled with his family while also
firing off missiles.
And it was widely acknowledged that this was pretty explosive stuff. From the palace perspective, it was
not great.
Yeah, not great. So this all took place in the aftermath of that interview. And it showed of Britons, it was people asked here, not in the States.
Yeah.
And it said that only 27% of Britons had a positive opinion of Prince Harry, with 63% having a negative view of him. And now, to put it in perspective, that's come down from 2011, when over 75%, over 3/4 of people had a very positive view of Prince Harry.
So that is the lowest it's ever been.
Has really plummeted. At the top, you had Prince William, Prince of Wales. then the Princess of Wales, then Princess Royal, then the King. So that's your top 4. And in the bottom, it's quite a different story.
It's Prince Andrew down there, isn't it?
Prince Andrew right at the bottom, Duke of York. And then above him is Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. And above her is Harry.
I think it, the findings of the YouGov poll recently do sort of reflect what I kind of pick up on the ground. So certainly generationally, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I often find that if I get into a cab and the cab driver asks me what I do and I say what I do, I find almost instantly the conversation turns to, oh, that Harry. What do you think of that Harry? I used to really like that Prince Harry. What's happened to Prince Harry? Mm-hmm. There is that feeling that he was beloved in the UK and, admired by so many and so popular. We used to see him sort of as number 2 to Queen Elizabeth. And now the feeling is, from a lot of people I speak to, they just feel, what's happened? And he's just plummeted, hasn't he, in the court of public opinion?
He has, and particularly among the older age group.
And I think that will, I know, Harry and Meghan say they don't look at social media and they don't read coverage of themselves, but I don't believe that. I think they do. And I think what the British public think of Harry really matters to Harry. He constantly still says, and he said in that BBC interview, the UK will always be my home. I love the UK. The problem is...
Well, some parts of it.
the polls show that the UK doesn't quite love him back so much at the moment. And I think that's probably a very hard pill for him to swallow.